Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Hey, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today. Today, we are here to talk about a very interesting topic and to tackle a very critical challenge that keeps many security teams up at night. Certainly does concern me, which is how to effectively test and validate cloud security without breaking the bank or burning out your teams. Before we dive in, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Arpan Sarkar, and I've been a security engineer for over 6 years now. In that time, I've had the fortune of doing some of the things I really enjoy doing, such as detection engineering, threat hunting, red teaming for organizations across the globe. Currently, I'm a senior security engineer here at Vectra AI, focusing primarily on cloud security and threat hunting. I do also love open source projects. I am an avid user of open source tools, and I have also created a couple of open source attack tools myself, one of which we will be checking out today. So I'm really excited about that. This is sort of an overview and kind of how the next 20-25 minutes will look like. We'll make sure that the session is as informative and practical as possible. We'll start off by talking about security testing in general, the current state of security testing and the challenges that come with it, and sort of kind of painting the picture of why we're doing what we're doing. Then we'll talk about what Halberd is, how you can set it up, and how you can actually start running your security testing with it, which is attack, automate, and analyze. And finally, we'll leave some time for questions and discussions at the end. So hopefully that sounds good. With that, let's jump in. So let's start by looking at an enterprise environment today. Most organizations, not just recently, but from many years, are running on multiple clouds, each with its own set of security models, attack surfaces, and compliance requirements. Then you need different tools for each platform, different interfaces to learn, different ways to authenticate. It becomes this complex juggling act of switching between tools, managing different credentials, and trying to piece together a complete picture of your security posture. Our attack surface isn't just growing, it's exploding. And that creates a challenge that traditional security testing approaches simply cannot keep up. So but we all know security testing is important, and now more than ever, either we are testing our own security or attackers are doing it for us. And if you trust me, their hourly rates are much higher. But here's the thing, right? Proactive security testing isn't just about avoiding breaches. It's also about building the confidence in our security posture and frankly, just sleeping better at night. The problem isn't, however, that we don't know that we need security testing. I'm sure most of us collectively agree that security testing is imperative and that we all should be doing it. The challenge, however, is that our current tools make it feel like rocket science. We need something that doesn't require everyone to have a PhD in cloud security to be able to perform necessary and effective security testing. Something that just works across our entire cloud ecosystem, something that lets us focus on results rather than wrestling with different tools and their settings. And finally, if you're taking a look at the reality of the attack surface today that we are defending, we notice that attackers do not see our environment as these separate clouds. They see it as one connected large playground. They will pivot from AWS to Azure, from Entra ID to M365, or exploit something like OIDC to move from GitHub to AWS. Our security testing needs to think the same way. We need to validate not just individual services, but the connections between them and how they can be abused and misused in an attack. And ultimately, make sure that our defenses can keep up and stop these cross-cloud propagations, and more importantly, effectively detect and surface these activities when they do happen in our environment. So that's kind of the premise, and this is where Halberd comes in. Think of it as your Swiss Army knife for cloud security testing that allows us to perform effective security testing by executing a vast library of attack techniques against multiple different cloud environments, all via a very simple and intuitive web interface that anyone on your security team can use. The goal here is simple. It's to make sure that security testing shouldn't be a luxury reserved for just teams with massive budgets and resources. It should be accessible, actionable, and dare I say, actually enjoyable to use. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here with Halberd. The traditional way of doing pen tests, of doing annual pen tests and using scattered tools is simply not effective. Modern cloud environments move too fast. So what we need is continuous validation that moves at that speed. That's where tools like Halberd can help, where we're bringing together speed, simplicity, and a comprehensive coverage. Going into the details, here's what Halberd can do. Well, Halberd is a multi-cloud attack tool that allows users to test security of AWS, Azure, Entra ID, and M365, and very soon GCP as well. So that's very exciting. And it doesn't just allow you to execute individual techniques, but also gives you capabilities to run attack playbooks, automate and schedule these playbooks, and even analyze your executions for reporting. So really that end-to-end security testing. And it enables you to do all of that via a very simple and very intuitive web interface. That means you don't have to deal with any code or even learn any commands or fiddle with confusing config files, just making it really simple and easy to use. And that the same reasons also make it very easy and fast to set up, which we'll see in just a bit. Finally, it's developed entirely in Python, and it's incredibly modular by design. So all the Pythonic things apply to the tool. So it's easy to add new techniques and update techniques over time. Also, like I mentioned before, it's open source, which makes it free to use for anyone. Anybody can use it, review it, and contribute to it, which is always a nice thing to have. And oh, and one more thing, for anyone who wants to do custom automation or build other cool things with the techniques in Halberd, there's also an option for CLI usage. So that's still there. Great. So I think that gives a good overview of what it is. But the best way to tell you what Halberd can do is to actually show you what it does. So we'll take a walkthrough of how you can get Halberd, how you can set it up, and how you can start testing with it. So let me go ahead and share my screen. We can go through this together. Perfect. So the first thing you want to do when you want to get Halberd is you want to go to the Halberd GitHub repository, which is Vectra AI research/Halberd. And this is the open source GitHub repository for Halberd, where you can get all the information. I do recommend everyone to go through the README in here. There's some good information. There's also the wiki, which contains a lot more detailed information about different things like the UI navigation, the different modules in Halberd, and so on. So do give it a read. But for now, once you are here, when you want to get Halberd set up on your environment, what you can do is go down to this Getting Started section, and here are the simple steps to get it set up. All you have to do is clone the repository or download it, or whatever method you prefer. Then just set up your Python environment, install the dependencies. This will take about a minute or two to install. And then finally, third step is to install the Azure CLI. Depending on the operating system you're using, Windows, Linux, or Mac OS, the steps slightly differ. So choose your step and ultimately just launch the halberd.py script. Once you do that, what it's going to do is it's going to spin up a web application locally on your machine and provide you with this URL, which is localhost at 8050. And to access Halberd from here, all you do is go to this URL and you will access the Halberd web application. So when you first launch Halberd, you will be greeted with this home screen where it gives you high-level information about what the tool is, what it contains in terms of the different techniques. So for now, it's telling us that there are nearly 88 techniques in the current version, spanning across 4 attack surfaces and 11 tactics. All of the techniques within Halberd are mapped to a relevant MITRE technique. So you will see all that you will see that being represented here in this chart. Some of the techniques, for instance, the ones from Azure, are also mapped to Azure Threat Research Matrix for anyone who finds that information useful. This is also a little bit interactive, so you can click on some of these, and it will give you information about what the technique is, a good description about what it does, the different references, and from here, if you want to jump into, let's say, MITRE, you can directly jump into it and read a little bit more about what the associated technique is. Great. So once you're here, and once you've gone through the different techniques that are available, you can start your testing. So to do that, the first step you want to do is go into attack. And this is where you have all the different techniques that you can execute with Halberd. The workflow is quite simple for executing a particular technique. What you do is on the left, you select an attack surface. Based on the attack surface you select, everything will dynamically update in terms of the available tactics, techniques, configuration, and information. So you can go through all of the different attack surfaces. We will take a few simple examples to just demonstrate how you can execute different techniques, establish access, but the process remains the same as you're exploring all the different techniques within Halberd. So we'll select Entra ID for an example. Then the next thing you want to do is make sure you have access. So this box over here indicates if you have access to a particular Entra ID, AWS, or Azure environment. And as you switch to the tabs, this indicator will also update based on what tab you're on. So for now, it's telling us we don't really have any access to this environment, or we did have access and it expired. So let's go ahead and establish access to start our testing. And the way to access an environment that you're going to test is no different than how you would do in terms of testing initial access to an environment. So you go into initial access, and this is where you will see all the different techniques that we have available for initial access in Entra ID within Halberd. So for instance, you have established access by exploring device code flow. You can establish access as a user by getting delegated access. You can, if you have credentials to an application or service principal, you can use the client ID and secret to get access as an application. If you have stolen, let's say, a token from an application or from a host, this is the graph access token. If you have that, you can use that directly in here and use that to establish your access. This is your JWT access token that you'll provide here. And then you have some of the other standard brute force and password square techniques. So for example, we'll go with the establish access with device code flow. Once you've selected a technique, you will see the relevant configuration for the technique in the middle widget. The way the configuration works is most of the required information is pre-populated or set as default within the technique. So what you're seeing here is the technique only requires tenant ID, indicated by this asterisk over here. That's a mandatory field. Everything else is either set as default or not required. For instance, it's telling us this is the client ID that it's using by default. I believe that's Microsoft Office. And then the scope is requesting for is the default scope. You can always just start putting in your own values to override the defaults. But for now, we're going to leave it to default. For the tenant ID, I'm going to give it my test tenant, which is demolab.vectra.ai. This is the one that we are going to target. And when you execute this, at the very bottom, this is the response window. So when you execute a technique, Halberd will take the output, parse it out, and display it in these clear cards, just making it easier for you to understand the information. This gets much more useful as we start looking at some of the more complex and larger outputs for some of the techniques. But here what it's telling us is, okay, we initiated a device code flow authentication. Now, typically an attacker would take this URL and this code, make it part of a phishing email and send it to a user and tell them, hey, here's a document, click on this link, use this code to access it, blah, 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 basically tricking them into authenticating on this URL. So I'm going to take this, and this could be done on a different machine as well. Let's say it's happening somewhere else. I'm going to click on the link with the code. Going to sign in as Michael Scott, continue, and this is where it basically stops. And I think, okay, the authentication didn't work or something didn't quite work. But on the other end, now if we go back to Halberd, And if you click on the access and if you click on the dropdown, there should be a new access token that we just captured. And it will show up in this dropdown. And if you select that, it will update the access information you have, and it's telling you that now you have a valid access token that you can use to target this Entra ID tenant. And it will also tell you some additional information related to this access. So for instance, you have, this is the entity you're connected as, this is the type of entity you're connected as, the type of access, validity, tenant, so on. And also the different scopes that you currently have in terms of doing actions within this tenant. And there you go, it dynamically updates to let you know that now you have access. Once the token expires, this will again turn back to red. Some of these access are persistent across different attack surfaces. So for instance, Entra ID and F365 both use the same graph token in Halberd's implementation. So when you go to Microsoft 365 now, you'll also see that you have access in there. Great, so now we have created access, now we verified access. Now let's go and start doing some of the different actions within the tenant. The way you do that is you can click on this tactics dropdown and select different tactics that you want to execute. And based on that, you will see all the different techniques that are contained within those tactics. So let's take a simple example. Now we have established access. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to enumerate users within the tenant. And for some of the simpler techniques like enumerate users, you don't really need any user input. So all you'll see is no config required, hit execute. So, okay, made too many requests, so it's going to wait for a while. But essentially, you can go through all these different techniques and experiment with them and see what they require. So for instance, enumerate applications. Again, you have all of the couple of different inputs that you require, but they're not marked as mandatory. So you don't really need to add any inputs to them. What you can also do is add to a playbook. So if you are, and we'll touch up on playbooks in just a bit, but if you are executing an attack and you want to add an attack to a playbook, you can simply directly configure the attack configuration in here. And you can click on Add to Playbook. This will bring up this window, which will allow you to select a particular playbook that's available, set it up, specify a particular step, set the wait time for the particular step, and add to the playbook. Great. So what else? You can go into Microsoft 365, and this is where you will see techniques and tactics specific to Microsoft 365. And for instance, let's say I want to use collection, right? You have all the different options in terms of deploying an email forwarding rule, searching in Teams, searching in you can even exfil the user's entire mailbox if you want to, or specify specific parameters to exfil, to limit your exfil. One of the other things you can do is search Outlook messages. And this is where you put in search keyword. For instance, I'm going to search for password and execute technique. And it's going to go through the user's mailbox and in Exchange and try to find different emails where it matches password. And what as an adversary I'm trying to look for is some sort of credentials or critical information that was shared in emails. And if you look through this, it doesn't really look like useful information. It's password here and there, which doesn't really give me much. Do you go pass? Let's try to look for something else. Let's try to look for AWS. And if you execute this, this is, if we look like there's a match for AWS credentials in here, and you can see that we have a key and a secret that Michael Scott shared with somebody. And this is a typical behavior that we see users do in any environment. And these are some of the things that are also difficult to put a control around to prevent. So and attackers know that. And for that, they try to exploit these user behaviors within the environment. So once you have access to an environment or an account, you try to look through their messages and emails to find secrets or credentials in there. So let's go ahead and now try these AWS credentials that we have our hands on. And typically, you'd have to set up a different tool, use a different tool to move on from here. But all we need to do is go into this AWS tab. And what we're trying to do is set up initial access. So I'm going to go into initial access. And to establish this access, we need three different things: a session name, a access key, and a secret. So I'm going to give it a name, which is test1. I'm going to test out these keys. And we don't really need a session token. And I'm going to execute this technique to see if this works. So we'll give it a couple of seconds. And if that works, perfect. So now we the authentication was successful, and we see we have this user ID. This is the AWS account, the ARN, and it's not currently the active session for us. So now if we click on the access button in here and we click on the drop down, we should have a session available for us. And if we click on that, it will give us the information about the session that we currently have active. Great. So, sorry. Oops. Okay. And now, just like that, you've moved on from Entra ID to M365 to AWS very quickly without having to switch between tools or figure out the nuances of each of these different environments. Now, if we, since we have access to AWS, if we click on, you can go into discovery, you can go into privilege escalation and try to do different things. So just an example, and to test out our connection, let's try to do enumeration of S3 buckets. Again, this doesn't really require any inputs. Everything is already pre-configured within the technique. So just hit execute. It's going to use the access that we have established and its permissions and try to enumerate S3 buckets within the environment. And this is where it also parses out all the different information and just displays it in card. One of the other quick things to touch up on is attack history. As you're going through your testing and you're looking at all of these different techniques, you can always revisit them. The attack history keeps a log of all the different techniques that you've executed, along with what identity did you use to execute them. And you can select any of these from the past to view the output of each of these executions. So this can be handy if you are executing a technique and you need to fetch some information from a technique that you previously executed. You can always go into attack history and fetch all the different information from previous executions. Great. And finally, once you have all of these attacks once you have figured out what are some of these techniques that you want to execute, you want to the next step is you want to automate them and make it easier for you to continuously test with them. So for that, we have something called Automator, which is basically this library of playbooks that allows you to create sequence of attacks that you can execute frequently or even schedule them. So these are some of the examples that I have in here, example playbooks. So for instance, you have this Midnight Blizzard technique emulation, which basically emulates the first half of the Midnight Blizzard attack on Microsoft and gives you a flow of what the playbook attack sequence looks like. This is something really small, which is just enumeration in Azure tenant. And these can span across multiple different attack surfaces. So for instance, this one moves from Entra ID to Azure to AWS, and by moving through all of these different clouds. What you can also do is create your own playbooks. So you can just click on this new playbook. You can give it a name, this one. Description is blah. I'm going to give it an author, just myself, and you can give it a reference. So in case you are referencing a particular attack or an incident that just came out and you're building a playbook based off of that, you can give URL to some sort of documentation or blog on that playbook, and I'll get to why we're putting some of this extra information. And then you can start creating your own playbook in terms of, okay, I'm going to establish access, configure those things here. You don't necessarily need to configure it here, but you can, and then add again, and you can configure all the different steps and create your own playbook. Oh, I do need the information in there. So, but that way you can create a playbook of your own. And the reason we put in all this extra information in terms of the the references and the author is because it also helps in terms of sharing some of these playbooks. So let's say you create a playbook or that you want to share with other members of your team and want them to test out, or other members of the community for that matter. You can create a playbook and you can export it. And when you try to export it by clicking on this download button here, it's going to give you this pop-up where it also gives you another option to hide the sensitive configuration. So let's say you created a playbook, you configured it with your specific software tenant. So I'm going to exfil S3 bucket, you put in the S3 bucket, you can establish access, you put in the credentials. But you don't want to accidentally export all of that information along with the playbook. You can just hide the sensitive configuration values and export it. And that's going to give you the playbook locally on your machine, and then you can share it however way you want to share it with your team members or other members of the community, and they can simply import the same playbook and have it in here and execute the exact same attack chains, promoting that information sharing and ease of testing. Finally, when you have the playbook, you can go ahead and execute it. And once you hit execute, it's going to bring up this window and it's going to run through all of the different steps in the playbook. So we'll give it a couple of seconds to go through this, and it's going to give you a real-time view of which steps succeed, which steps fail, and so on. Great. Once it's done, it's going to create a report and save it on your local machine. And the report is very extensive in terms of output saved for each particular step of the playbook, overall report in terms of what failed, what succeeded, and so on. Finally, the last piece of testing, which is to report. And for that, you can go into this analyze window, which gives you this really nice dashboard with a lot of different information in your from your testing. What it's doing is collecting all the different logs from your testing in Halberd and drilling them down into this bits of useful information. So for instance, here you can always shorten this up. Let's bring this down to just this month. You're showing you how many total executions did you make, how many different techniques did you execute, what was the success rate of all of the different attacks that you performed, the average interval, so how fast did you move between different techniques, a time series chart or telling you when did you execute all the different techniques, and goes into a lot more detailed information in terms of the attack surface distribution, the attack surface attack success rate per tactic, and all of these are interactive. So let's say you want to see this distribution without Azure. You can simply click on it and you can see the distribution without Azure. You can drill down into a particular segment and just look into it. So all of these are quite interactive, and you can also export them into PNGs in case you want to use any of these graphs in your reports or presentations for post-test analysis. And the last piece of all of this is export report. You can also export all this information directly into a already created HTML report. And if you open this report, it's also interactive. It gives you an HTML report of the same sets of information, but with a lot more detail than what's displayed on just that dashboard. So in here, you're seeing the key metrics, the tactic analysis, showing you per technique how many times each of those things were executed. And finally, it's showing you the per source detailed analysis, which is basically every single identity that you use to perform different actions. It's going to give you analysis for that particular identity. So for Michael Scott, these were the techniques, this was the success rate, this was a failure, these were specific techniques, when they were executed, what were the outcomes, and so on. If you go to the very bottom, there should also be, this is the AWS identity that we used. So really bringing together all the different things and end-to-end testing into one single tool. We are at the top of the hour, so hopefully that was useful. Hopefully that was informative, and it gives you a good idea of how you can start leveraging Halberd to perform your own security testing or improve your current security testing processes. This last call outs, I would encourage everybody to get Halberd, put it through its paces, test your environments, whether test them regularly and frequently. And finally, if there are any questions or comments, feel free to share them. Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I didn't see any questions come in through the chat, but we are certainly available to take any questions afterwards. This session is also being recorded and will be available on demand. So you're welcome to come back and review it or share it with a colleague that might find it valuable as well. And just a final reminder to download the resources, which are located in the resource section within the console. And again, we want to thank everyone for joining and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.